Good evening, I am the Sandman. Tonight's story is called Last Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, and the snowflakes outside danced like fragile ghosts in the moonlight. Inside the small, isolated cabin, Emma stared at the fire crackling in the hearth, its warmth a sharp contrast to the chill that seemed to linger deep in her bones. Her husband David was in the kitchen, humming a Christmas carol, completely oblivious to the weight of the silence hanging between them. This Christmas was supposed to be perfect. Just the two of them, away from the world, surrounded by the beauty of nature. But Emma could feel something shifting. It wasn't the cold, and it wasn't the loneliness. It was something deeper, something older. She shivered again, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "David," she said, her voice hesitant, "did you lock the door?" David's humming stopped abruptly, and a strange stillness settled over the room. He appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His expression was unreadable, as if a shadow had crossed his face. "Of course I did," he said too quickly. Emma wasn't sure why, but the response unsettled her. She stood and walked over to the window, peering out into the blackness beyond. The forest was silent, save for the faint rustle of wind through the trees. The world outside looked peaceful, untouched by anything sinister. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She turned to David. "Are you sure we're alone here? There's no one around, right?" David's smile was a little too wide, his eyes a little too bright. "It's just us, Em. Always just us." There was a peculiar coldness to his words. Her stomach tightened. She had never questioned David before, but tonight, everything felt wrong. "You're not acting like yourself," she whispered, stepping back from the window. David's smile faltered for a split second. He turned to the kitchen counter, his movements stiff. "What do you mean? It's Christmas. Everything's fine." But Emma wasn't so sure. She had known David for years. She knew the way his voice wavered when he was hiding something, the way his eyes darted when he was lying. And tonight, both were unmistakable. She wanted to confront him, to ask him why he seemed so strange, but something stopped her. Something dark and ancient tugged at her thoughts, urging her to stay silent. She didn't know why, but she knew it was too late to question it now. The night was already unfolding, its shadows creeping closer. The clock on the wall chimed midnight. Emma froze. The chime echoed through the cabin, and in that instant she knew that something was wrong. The air seemed to thicken, as though the walls themselves were closing in around her. The fire in the hearth flickered and dimmed, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like spirits across the room. Suddenly the door to the cabin creaked open. Emma gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. She spun toward David, who stood there motionless, his gaze fixed on the open door. His expression was unreadable, like he was waiting for something. Something or someone. "David," she whispered, voice trembling. But he didn't answer. Instead, he slowly walked toward the door, his steps eerily quiet on the wooden floor. "David, what are you doing?" Emma cried, her fear mounting. He didn't respond. He simply reached for the door handle and pulled it wide open, revealing the pitch-black night outside. Standing on the threshold was a figure, tall, thin, and draped in a long coat that fluttered in the wind like a dark, tattered cloak. Its face was obscured by a hood, but Emma could feel its presence, cold and suffocating. David stepped aside, making no move to stop the figure from entering. "David!" Emma shouted, rushing toward him. "What is this? Who is that?" But David didn't look at her. He just stared at the figure as though he were waiting for something. The figure stepped forward, its heavy boots making a soft thud on the floor. Emma wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't obey her. Fear paralyzed her in place. And then the figure lowered its hood. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The face beneath was pale, almost as if it had been drained of life. Its eyes, black as night, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Who are you?" she whispered, backing away. The figure's lips twisted into a grin, sharp, jagged, unnatural. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Emma's pulse quickened. Her mind raced, but she couldn't place the voice. It was so familiar, yet so wrong. It leaned forward, the smile stretching wider. "Last Christmas, I was just a memory. This year, I'm your past." Suddenly, the realization hit her. It wasn't just a figure. It wasn't just a stranger. It was someone from her past. Someone she had buried long ago, someone she had loved, but lost. Someone whose death had haunted her every Christmas since. David's voice broke the silence. "Merry Christmas, Em. I told you we'd be together forever." The figure raised its hand, and Emma screamed as the room seemed to close in around her. The walls constricted, the shadows lengthened, the fire flickered out. David stepped into the darkness, and everything went cold. I hope you enjoyed that strange little tale. Do join me again soon.